You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis show, and my guest, Ace Ankuma, Dr. Echahene, and Bright Simmons. And you have followed them lay bare their understanding of these various reports and the Bank of Ghana's position on why we have 7 banks that have collapsed. And in the collapse, the nation is having to take up, the taxpayer is having to take up such a huge, burden. And Dr. Tiahine a while ago was suggesting we may not have seen, the actual length of that dead frog yet, because it does appear the nation may have to take up more than we currently know. Now, there's an aspect which is his pets area, because so far you have heard him, and I think I've heard Bright also speak about the fact of the need of prosecutions and all of that. But there are aspects of what you said that I want to get some little more clarity on. And then when we come to ACE2, you spoke about the fact that some of the persons that are supposed to be involved may not be guilty, and we ought to pay attention to that. And you stress the point on why we should not push the Bank of Ghana or the Attorney General's department who may be working now. We shouldn't push them, we shouldn't hurry them, because they need to take a certain detailed step. He will explain what he meant by that. And we know also by the law, as Yoni Kolendi pointed out last week to us and read the law clearly to us, that there is a need to prove knowledge and participation of the persons that are involved as part of the board to, find them liable for any offense at all. But as we know, the finance minister, while speaking at the Dankwa Institute's event, made an announcement that he was going to go into a meeting with the Attorney General and so on and so forth. We know that the Attorney General is not leaving any stone unturned, that as we speak, processes are in advanced stages and the prosecutions will happen. There are people who will have to explain why they have to be paid over 100,000 Ghana cedis a month, when their pay by month is translated from dollars into Ghana cedis. They are receiving in excess of 100,000 cedis. There are some who are receiving upwards of 90,000, and they will need to explain how they even had to receive such, huge amounts, even at the point when they were receiving liquidity support. I guess these are very interesting times that we can expect. And from what we learn from our very unimpeachable sources, the president is committed to this, and that the prosecutions must happen. Now, Bright, you bring in the aspect of, and Ace points to, why not this process that eventually will seek to bring the number of banks to a smaller and manageable number. You say Singapore has 200 banks, and so the number of banks shouldn't be the problem. We know that the Bank of Ghana practically is using the Nigerian model in resolving the problem. And in the Nigerian model, we know that at the end, they successfully, in the positive sense, collapsed many of the banks and left a number that now competes with international banks. Why shouldn't Ghana get to that point? You bringing the question of the minimum capital regime, and you feel that 400 is just too much, or not segmented, blanket 400 is just too much. How is that part of the solution to the crisis the banks find themselves in now?
I think it starts off from explaining very clearly what minimum paid-up capital is there to achieve and what capital adequacy is there to achieve. Minimum paid up capital is essentially you want to form a bank. What's your own skin in the game? Before other people trust you and put in their deposits and other people give you subordinated debt or whatever it is that you are using for your further investments. What is your own skin in the game? So your own skin in the game is the capital you commit through your shareholders and you mobilize. It's also considered the safest capital because in the beginning that capital is committed for the bank's purposes. There's very limited restrictions on that capital. Once you start trading as a bank and you are giving loans, advances, you are buying treasury bills, you are keeping reserves pursuant to regulatory requirements, etc. Over time, it becomes clear that some of your loans won't come back, some will come back. Some of your loans, because the interest income is your main source of earnings, may be impaired if the people that you give the loans to are not paying interest, etc. So it becomes clear that what you started off with is not the most important thing. That is why when you look at the capitalization review that was carried out in advance of proposing this new capital minimum capital requirement, we found out that it was not necessarily the banks that had high minimum capital that were the safest.
Okay.
In fact, in one instance, Beige Bank, I think, had higher paid up capital than some of the most premium banks in this country. I think 200 million Ghana cedis or something like that. In fact, Unibank actually argues that it had the highest paid up capital as of 2017.
Actually, certified by the Bank of Ghana,
Good.
they did.
Of course, if you consider income surplus, then the likes of GCB and the rest will overtake it. But in terms of minimum paid up capital, they can prove that they had the highest. What does that tell the Bank of Ghana? Capital adequacy, on the other hand, refers to the risks of your assets. And the bank's assets, these loans and these advances, primarily, of course, if it's about treasury bills and the rest of, but those are all types of loans. A treasury bill is a loan to the government, as an example. So, what is the risk profile of those assets? And how much does it have to provision in order that if some of those failed, it can still pay deposits? I mean, the structure of banking is not that complex. It doesn't change since we're doing banking in Venice. It doesn't change primarily. I put my money in your bank, which is also why banks are particularly different, in the sense that they are open when a bank thinks of its creditors, like Unibank. Its creditors is essentially the 400,000 people or institutions who had deposits with them, in addition to whoever they are borrowed from. But the general public is often invited to become creditors of a bank. That is why if you look at Act 179, Section 3 and 4, it makes it clear that if a company invites deposits from the general public, then that company cannot be required as a private company.
No, it can't.
So banks are effectively public companies. You understand my point?
Okay.
Now, a bank takes these monies, and the bank then extends loans and advances to people. In the process of doing that, it creates money. Because these are loans that these are deposits that people can come and take back at different times. Some of them instantly, whenever they want, like call deposits.
Right.
But it has given this money to somebody else who has also deposited in another bank, etc. So it's a chain that creates money in the economy. So banks are quasi-public. Are you understand my argument? Now, based on the loans that you've given out, what if tomorrow everybody came and said they wanted to take their money out? You've given the money out. How are you going to cover that gap? That is essentially the idea of capital adequacy. So it is important that a bank has enough reserves at all times to meet depositors' demands. That has very little to do with the bank's minimum paid up capital, which is the capital that its shareholders have committed. When you understand the difference between the two, then it's simply a matter of whether banks should start off with a lot of money and whether continuing and going forward, shareholders should commit a lot of money in a bank. Because the implication of that is that...
And your proposition is for the first.
No, my proposition is that we should continue to have high capital adequacy.
Great.
But we already have high capital adequacy in respect of Basel.
Okay.
I think Basel was 8%. We have been 10% for quite a while. And for most of the actual indicators, when you look at it critically, we are practically in compliance.
Okay.
The issue that, as I've mentioned, is that the evolving innovations, which have made Basel III such an important thing, are not occurring here. So some of the speed, some of the rush, into my mind, is often not very clear, but that's another matter. So my argument is, when it comes to paid up capital, it's really about the size of the bank in general. Because how much shareholders have committed invariably must be recovered back, which means that a certain number of assets are needed to justify how much shareholders are put in. So your return of equity and your return on assets require therefore that you loan out a lot. It's in very simple terms. So if I put up 100 million, I need to loan out maybe $1 billion for it to be justified because of the income that I'm getting to get my ROA to something within about 4%, 5%. Or my return on equity to something around 16%. I think Ghana is around 16%.
Yeah, 16%.
You understand what I'm saying? So if you do the calculations, inevitably requiring $100 million, nearly $100 million minimum capital requires a bank, if it is to maintain its return on equity and return on assets, to give out a lot of loans. It's that simple. So what the Bank of Ghana is saying that I want banks that give out a lot of loans. That is effectively this whole thing about minimum capitalization. It's not, a lot of people think that it means that the bank is stronger. Indeed. But it is stronger in relation to the risk of its assets, because it doesn't matter how much minimum capital you have. Even if you have 500 million, and you've given out the loans of only 800 million, but 700 million of those loans are not coming back. You can still not meet the depositors' claims.
All right.
You understand my point?
All right.
So it's not necessarily the fact, just as we've seen with Unibank, they have significant minimum capital, but when the time came to impair their capital, their liabilities still exceeded their assets. Which is essentially the core point about insolvency. So my argument is that we need to be very clear what we are talking about. That's one. In terms of whether you have a lot of banks, that's a matter of licensing. That has very little to do with capital, any of these things we are talking about. It's a matter of licensing. If you say, show me your business plan, Ghana is actually quite saturated with banks. I want to understand how different you are going to be. And you say, I want to invest in only people who do sugarcane. That's me as a bank, that's my strategy for the market. I say, sugarcane, I don't think it's going to work.
A says if you have to do that, if you have to allow a regime where banks populate, you must have a strong and sharp supervision and monitoring.
But even before you get there,
what the Bank of Ghana is doing now will eventually lead to it's a regime that is set to see many of the local banks either merge or collapse by December.
Okay, let me explain one point. Inevitably, the position of the Bank of Ghana is that it likes big banks, it doesn't like small banks. Simple. Like, let's not make it complicated.
All right.
You want the banks to be big. Minimum asset base of around $1 billion. Nearly $1 billion. That's what it gets to. Now, my argument is if you want to prevent banks from being too many banks in the economy, and that could be a sensible policy stance, it depends. You start with licensing.
That's right.
If I come and I say I want to set up a bank, look at the business plan, because the risk management regime is not limited purely to how to do your credit assessments. There's also operational risk issues. There's also a whole range of market risk issues. So if Ghana, for instance, is in Dumso, and you say you want to set up a big steel plant, it doesn't matter that you are a great manager. It doesn't matter that the price of steel is reasonable and therefore your unit economics work out. The macroeconomic environment may not be sufficient. So the argument is if somebody wants to set up a bank and you look at their business plan and it doesn't appear to suggest that they present unique strengths in the banking sector, and they don't add anything to your banking sector, you can deny them the license. And there was a time that we had a moratorium on license issuance in this country under Dr. Polakwa for many years, and nobody complained. So my argument is, you start with licensing. Now you're arguing, okay, but this is a roundabout way of getting there, because now that you've increased minimum capitalization, it's a risky gambit, because what may happen is that you enter into an adverse selection spiral, where people that get into banking are only those who are willing to take big risks. Because to be able to sustain your return on equity and return on assets, you need to ensure that you are significantly growing your assets base. So it can lead to asset inflation. And if you have a situation where people that are highly risk-seeking are in the banking sector, inevitably, it has implications for other banks and the rest of it, because of the kind of things they go around and do. And we've seen serial entrepreneurs enter the banking industry in Ghana. We now know for a fact who have done some really risky things. Why? Because in my view, there has been policy, a policy context which encourages unnecessary risk. Already you have very high interest rates. In that kind of environment, you only lend if the returns are going to be massive. So you have banks that are playing like venture capitalists, looking for 5x returns on investment and returns. And that is a problem. The other fact of the matter is also, and this goes to the Unibank, Bank of Ghana quarrel. Unibank says that Bank of Ghana cannot arbitrarily impair their assets. You know, what does that mean? That means simply that if I give a loan out and I have 100 million to ACE, then Dr. Chiahene is the Bank of Ghana, and he comes in and says, the 100 million you have given to ACE, I don't think it's worth 100 million anymore. I think it's now worth 30 million because ACE is not likely to pay the whole amount over time. And therefore, I want you to impair that asset, reduce the value of that asset. But in the same instance, when you do that, you have to make provision for it. So your interest expense then goes up and the rest of it. Unibank say they disagree with the way that the bank have gone ahead.
Especially that they include even government loans.
We have said that
to say that government cannot afford to pay back.
So the argument is that government is risk-free. We have a situation in this country with BDCs who also lend to government. They, because they give fuel to
and they have to take a haircut.
They have to take a haircut. Yeah. I was doing the computation that I think it's about 30% haircut or something like that.
If you mismanage the country, you have mismanaged everybody.
Exactly. So what is the argument? The argument, therefore, is that governments lending to government is not necessarily free. No. Secondly, the IFRS, if you look at the act, what do you call it, the 930. If you look at the 930, it makes it very clear that the accounting principles should be IAS focused, rather, right? International accounting standards. And Basel core principles. What is the current loan loss provisioning principle in international banking? It's IFRS 9. And IFRS 9 says you must do continuous impairment. I must continuously look at your asset. I shouldn't wait till there's an event of a likelihood of default. So the Bank of Ghana is completely within its rights, acting competently to come to you and say the loans that you have given out, given the current situation. Given how much we are looking at, maturity, points and interest inflows and the rest of it, we think this asset is no longer what it is.
Okay. Okay. So and a number of times I get, judges ask me, you shouldn't preside over a situation where a live case is going on in court and you are pronouncing on it. So I'm just going to issue the caveat that we should be careful with this particular matter, which is already, the court is now seized with it, so that we don't pronounce on the merit. However, I belong to that school of thought, as supported by Dr. Raymond Atuguba and Professor Michael Quay, that issues that go to court that are of national importance, that have public interest, significance, should not come under the caveat of, if you speak about them, you'll be slapped with the sledge of contempt.
Let me make another point, which is that the issue of how you do loan loss provisioning is not a matter restricted Unibank and the Bank of Ghana. It's a policy matter of interest in an ongoing basis. They are still doing loan loss provisionings as we speak.
All right.
So it includes also the issue of beneficial ownership, which is also a matter that is before the court.
Right.
Act 920 is not restricted to Unibank. No, 920 for beneficial ownership.
Right.
Amendment of the
Act. It also
the amendment that you love.
Exactly. It's also an issue, but it's not only Unibank that it's at stake. It's not only the Unibank issue that's at stake.
Right.
There are several situations today with banks that are already in existence and are still operating, where we have beneficial ownership issues that are clearly evident to everyone in the public.
Right.
So we can discuss them.
So briefly, maybe in a minute, Bright, do you subscribe to the view that it is not late for the Bank of Ghana to reconsider the minimum capital regime, the blanket nature of it?
They've already moved. Now they are saying that they are willing to work with the banks that are locally run and locally owned, but which have strong governance standards. They are willing to work with them to meet the requirements. So that's already some movement, as in the government is willing to give them money. My feeling is that it's simply compounding risk upon risk.
Okay.
So now we're going to have public money at risk at some point. My argument is very simple. They have the opportunity to do what happens in prudential regulation in the United Kingdom by saying these are recommended levels, but we can look at things on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
And if they do that, they have a minimal capital requirement, but there's some discretionary element there that allows them to say, because you are ADB and you are focused on agricultural lending, if we also want you to focus on agricultural lending, Ghana cannot absorb $100 million bank, capital bank that can do $1 billion in agricultural investment. Okay. It's sensible and logical that you cannot, as a government, impose a development objective on a bank. Lend to the agricultural sector in a sector that's very risky, and where already we know that absorbing productive capital is difficult, and then still insist that bank must have a minimum capital of $100 million.
All right.
When we know very well it's very difficult for it to maintain its return on equity, invest in the agricultural sector. What kind of logic is that?
All right. So as far as Bright is concerned, you see, all the measures, if they will end in a situation where you will not have what he calls the permanent emergency situation, where there is the chronic liquidity support for what he says is a risky casino type banking. For as long as these measures will stop this, then we are good to go. Now, Ace has been writing for quite a while now. And I don't like it when he writes, because when he writes, it means it's going to be a lot more measured.
You want me to just speak off the cuff? I hear you. Get into more trouble.
Okay, so I had earlier, pointed to the point you referred to. You say, look, what do you say about the fact that a bank is found to have committed 24 infractions and had only worked to address only 4, and it took us from 2014, that's when it had redressed only 4, and it took us from 2014 up to 2017 before the Bank of Ghana could act on that bank. What should we do to avoid such situations? And number 2, what do you mean when you say all the people who are being, talked about as involved may not be liable? If they are parts, Ghanaians say this is what it is. Ghanaians say we are in a hurry. We want the prosecutions to start. You say we shouldn't hurry them. Why not?
I said don't hurry them, but they should hurry up. Hurry may be either with a U or an A. It depends on how it happens. Yes, look, some of the things that took place, and let me make a statement that might end me up in trouble that I don't care about, could only have taken place in the midst of criminality. Unless and until some people in the Bank of Ghana were paid to have their eyes widely shut, these could not have happened. But let me start this way. We are a nation that has all the good laws, but have perfected the act of breaching the laws. And so, hit by a thunderbolt of honesty, we passed the Public Procurement Act. So everything must go to tender. And then we created 2 exceptions. Sole sourcing and restricted tendering. And we have used sole sourcing and restricted tendering to breach the law several times. So we have perfected how to defeat the law. So when the IMF and the World Bank show up, we'll show them the law. We are good boys. We are playing ball.
Right.
But it's like a screensaver. All you have to do is to touch the space bar, and the reality of the program jumps out at you that we are just stealing and milking from this country. It's as simple as that. Now, look, the concept of beneficial owners formally got introduced here in 2016. It's one of the most pervasive lifting the veil provisions by statute, where we would disregard the so-called corporate veil and look at who is actually sitting back at the company, whose name may not be in the books, but is the eminence gris. Whatever he says, they do. The people are accustomed to obeying his instructions. The law says, write their names down. If they are politically exposed persons, the law wants to know about them. You must report on them in your annual reports. But who is doing it and who is checking it? You need then a Registrar General's department that is fully computerized with the relevant algorithms to go through the documents quickly, to pick up all of these red flags so that the Registrar General can do it. The Registrar General can't go over how many thousands of companies that are filed physically. You need to hire more people. We can't afford the lawyers, and we have blocked them from going to school, even some more. So we must begin to realize that the world is in 2018. We can't continue to use 19th century physical monitoring strategies, because the human being will beat it. I'm digressing, but let me give this example. When the Procurement Act was passed, it put in place a process for selling government assets, which strictly required a board of inquiry report before any government asset is sold. And it should be sold at an auction. But government cars were routinely sold at the end of every regime without going through the process. When civil society organizations made noise, government people said, well, the law says plant and equipment. Buildings, plant and equipment. We are not sure that cars are plant or equipment. That person heard that car is not equipment. So it is not covered. So with pressure from civil society and donor organizations, in 2016, in I believe June or July 2016, we amended the law to specifically say that vehicles are caught under the disposal procedure under the Act, so that government vehicles can no longer be sold at
Scrap value.
Scrap value, typically peppercorn, probably, if to the extent that peppercorn applies in vehicle sales, to ministers and political actors every December, 4 years, every 4 years, December. The law was amended, put in place in, I believe, July 2016. Guess what happened in December 2016? We sold more vehicles without going through the procedure. 381 vehicles were sold in a matter of a week. Now, the point is that, so that simply means that crimes have been committed. The government official who supervised it, the people who purported to do the valuation, the people who sold have all committed offenses under the Act, but should face criminal prosecution. Who is going to do it? Maybe because the people to enforce it are looking to buy their own vehicles. That's the problem we have. Look, the bank owners played hanky-panky with the possessed funds. The Bank of Ghana did nothing. In one instance, in fact, let's be bold, Bank of Ghana participated in how to cook the books to hide this. And let me make this caveat. If I say Bank of Ghana, I say current leadership accepted. They went in and saw that the person had siphoned money out using fake accounts that people had taken investments. They found that they were fake.
In breach of Act 749.
In complete breach of the law. What should the Bank of Ghana have done? That person should have been removed immediately as a director of the company. Bank of Ghana said, and this is the term, it will be restructured as a shareholder loan. If the shareholder hasn't taken a loan, why are you giving him a loan? In other words, the shareholder admits that I took this money. So when the banks failed, and the Bank of Ghana was providing liquidity support, I've come to dislike the term. The Bank of Ghana officials acted like a bunch of robots. Now, under the law, you can't give liquidity support to a bank that is non-solvent. Guess what? Breached. Somebody in Bank of Ghana should be heading to jail. Somebody who took the money should be heading to jail. Breached by Bank of Ghana, no sanctions. 2, you cannot give it out without collateral. Which means then that before you give out the money, you must look at the asset base of the entity to see whether it has enough in the event of breach to cover what you're giving to
safe
them.
assets like treasury bills.
Guess what? 0. Breached. No collateral was taken. 3, even the agreements they signed with the banks in giving them the money said we will appoint an advisor so that you can't use a cedi of this money without the approval of the advisor. Guess what? Breached. No advisors. Now appointed. Now it was in a movie which was said that the first time is coincidence, second time happenstance, third time enemy action. A James Bond movie. Clearly, somebody in Bank of Ghana was on the take to go to bed. That's why I said that it was bank purchase propofol that put them to sleep. Now, so a person is able to form a bank in Ghana on nothing but air, has virtually no money. Cooked commercial paper. The banks were saying, show us evidence of the cash. He didn't show evidence of the cash, and yet the license was finalized.
That's what the deputy minister calls magicians.
Yeah.
That's what they were doing.
In my street language, I call it juju and tricks. That's what's going on. Now, another person is able to siphon $500 million of depositors' funds into personal projects, completely unaccountable, and Bank of Ghana agrees to cook the books with the person. Now, another had wanton breach of single obligor limits to a politically exposed person who should have been declared to the Registrar General as easily a beneficial owner. The person wanted $5 million in breach of single obligor limits. Bank of Ghana, they write to Bank of Ghana. Bank of Ghana is unable for exemption. Bank of Ghana, for some reason, is not bold enough to say no. Why? Because of who the person was or is. Yet it didn't say yes. In the delay, the bank simply washed the money to savings and loans, microfinance.
Right.
And that microfinance lent it to the politically exposed person, and they breached it. Chopped the money. They didn't pay it back. Now, you see, the first time doesn't look bad, but as you go through it, you say that there's something here. There's a cadaver. There's a dead body somewhere here, and it's thinking. Another bank takes an overnight facility from Bank of Ghana, which is emergency funds.
Right.
Emergency funds, overnight, to buy shares in another bank. overnight facility is used for a share purchase. Now, do Ghanaians understand that the overnight facility is our money? Clearly, the people at Bank of Ghana, who are supposed to be the gatekeepers, watching over the taxpayers' money, so it is used to build that road and probably support free SHS,
Right.
are widely asleep or on the take. One bank could lend billions through the MD to related persons without going through the law, but no involvement of his risk department. In fact, the report shows that those loans are not on the list from risk department, which is an impossibility. Every banker will say, that's impossible. Well, guess what? It happened. And a substantial portion of the loan was classified in the books as other assets. Other assets? Where are the notes? Because if it shows us up as other assets in the audit, the director may not ask. But if it is put there that note 6, if I turn to note 6, I should see the particularization to realize that it has been deliberately misclassified. Where was the audit firm who audited this? This should not pass any auditing standard. I'm not an auditor. I'm a poor, overworked, underpaid lawyer. But even I, from my limited position, understand. Your people are laughing. Yes, I'm overworked and underpaid. Now, there was a failure to supervise the liquidity support. It was criminal. It was criminal. Literally, they just played cha-cha with our money, just gave it to them. And as we know, took kickbacks. And the police must investigate this. Look, they staggered the discretionary minimum capital requirement. And I like what Bright is saying, that we should think about them. Maybe not all of them need 100 million. But right now, this is the problem. And maybe that should happen. But we have a major problem now. I think the Bank of Ghana, in setting it at 400 million cedis, is saying we don't have the wherewithal to do the necessary supervision. Okay. It is not a sufficient insurance. But with the craziness that has gone on, there's the need for some stability. And it appears that that stability is what they want to achieve with 400 million. I know one particular bank who says, we don't need 400 million for our work. We haven't defaulted in anything. Our work is going on. We don't need to park that money anywhere.
Right.
Because reserves and very little interest.
Very little interest. So, and actually, this is the Bank of Ghana. And to be used to pay the liquidity support of another bank. Exactly. And when it is used to pay the liquidity support, to plug the hole, they will raise a bond and pay interest on it. So Ghanaians end up paying for this over and over again. So let me make a point and close. Mr. Ghanaian, Madam Ghanaian, listen to me. Probably the reason why the road to your house has not been fixed is that government has to find 8 billion cedis, $2 billion, to cover the shenanigans of other Ghanaians who are not counting interest. We're not counting interest. They borrow the money. And that money, which could have been used for other purposes for Ghanaians, now has to be used to do this. I make the point, people do not like it. But if you play Monopoly, there's a certain card you draw. It says, go straight to jail. If you pass go, don't take 200. Mr. Government, Ghanaians are waiting for you.
Okay, so Kwame Esedusapon says, the more I listen to Newsfile and enumerate the legal breaches, the more I wonder how some people are still at home eating fufu and doing other things.
Is it the fufu that's the issue?
So the question is, why do you say they should hasten slowly?
Why do I say that?
Yes.
Because, and let me explain this, white-collar crime, which is what appears to me to have happened here, is very delicate to prosecute. Because it doesn't matter the nature of the crime. The standard of proof is beyond reasonable doubt. Which means that your investigation, it's not the normal prosecution of a person who has stolen a goat and it's obvious. He entered the place, he took the goat. Stealing is, a person steals if you appropriate a thing of which you are not, dishonestly appropriate a thing of which you are not the owner. Okay? So the process must be deliberate. Because if you go in and miss one, it's over. Let me give you a typical example. The Woyome trial. It's one of the worst, it should be one of the worst in our history. In fact, if you read the judge's judgment, it appears to me he wrote that judgment at the submission of no case. Because by the time we're done, we hadn't proven anything. But we were in a situation in this country where, and let me repeat this, I said it on this program, I was sitting in that chair when I said it, where the internal confidential documents of the Attorney General's department, where people were debating the case and raising doubts, which is good. If there are doubts, you answer them, or it might take a decision that I'm not going to go on with this at all. Got leaked to the defense and were tendered in evidence without objection. That case was bound to fail from day one. And the Court of Appeal confirmed it, that the criminal trial failed. But the civil matter got us our money back.
Right.
Because the standard of proof there is less. But the criminal matter couldn't send anybody to jail. That is one of the worst situations.
And because of the slow pace of the process, the civil matter got us our money back on paper.
On paper.
We are still unable to retrieve the money, except 4 million.
Yes.
I mean, the money must be working somewhere.
So a Ghanaian who sits and says, I don't think anything will come out of this is probably justified. So maybe in my defense, this is what I'll say, to my defense of the system. Let them take it on a one-by-one basis. I believe that we put a high-powered team together, go through these, pick up where all the red flags are, build the evidence before they take them to court. And let's remember that when things go to court, they don't always get resolved very quickly. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I always give Mueller as an example. Mueller has been investigating for quite a while. Some of the convictions he got were plea bargains. But the first trial just ended. It might be that quick. And I've seen that the Chief Justice does it. When these matters goes to court, she gives it to a judge and say, do it on a case-by-case basis. But that is where we come to one of the problems with Ghana. Because our law isn't that developed in the area of our criminal jurisprudence. And we are still largely depending on 1960, the 1960 legislation, which just repeated the previous ordinance. There's so much that is not developed. For example, the right of the accused person to all the evidence of the state,
Right.
which is those discrepancies, which is part of the law of the US, is not part of our law. So when that matter gets raised in the High Court, the judge finds himself or herself at sea. So he says
current decisions.
Now that has been settled.
So he says, go to the Supreme Court.
Right.
That takes 6, 8, 9 months to a year. So there's a delay in the trial. So that has been settled. But these are some of the...
Through the Opuni case, has now been settled. So you are supposed to give them the evidence up front.
And I think the NCA case as well.
Right.
The NCA
yeah,
trial.
the NCA trial.
But guess what? We have to go all the way to the Supreme Court for this to happen. So as we do this, legal experts should sit down. In which ways can we reform our law to 2018 criminal procedure? Which,
I have a lot to say.
I mean, that's why the Supreme Court,
right,
for example, rejected a PowerPoint presentation. I mean, can you believe that? They rejected a PowerPoint presentation. And that tells us that we are still trying 2018 cases, sophisticated white-collar crimes, with 1960 criminal procedure.
Age.
It was outdated in 1960. Right now, I don't know what it is.
Very interesting. Now, just a quick one for you also, and then I'll take comments from our viewers and listeners, our audience across the globe who are listening and watching. Now, you spoke about the IMF report, and often you have gone back to the IMF report and the complaints it has and the warning it has given to the Bank of Ghana. And your problem is that the Bank of Ghana simply doesn't heed these warnings. If it did, we may not be where we are today. What specifically of all the recommendations by the IMF, which two of them do you propose the Bank of Ghana must work on now to avoid a recurrence?
I think.
But on the question of you speaking about the regulators not meeting, and so they are dispersed and people are taking advantage of all of this, you don't forget that the Bank of Ghana, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the MPRA, they have a forum. They have the regulators forum, and they meet together, as frequent as they wish, regular.
I think some of the things that they have, it's not just they have to do it. I mean, emergency liquidity support, for instance. IMF country report in 2017, 17/262, insisted that Bank of Ghana should have a committee which would sit and approve and assess the merit of it. Fortunately, they have done it. So now, if you're going for emergency liquidity, it's not just like those that ACE is talking about. Somebody somewhere would have to assess it, look at it, review it, and even monitor. And again, make sure that, you see, we don't, as we all said, Emergency liquidity is not given to insolvent and illiquid company. They were given to insolvent. But now the caveat is that it should be solvent. And it should be collateralized with government bill or treasury bill. And the problem is set for only 3 months. And it's set for only 3 months. Fortunately, Bank of Ghana has done that. The other ones that you're talking about, which I believe we should be very strong about it, is that these corporate governance directives. I've read it. It looks good, but it needs to be enhanced. Because we've all been saying that directors are appointed, like they call Ace to come and set up as a board. Ace is a fantastic lawyer. You want to bring him into finance. There is a need for us to have a process where, yes, where there is what we call the board orientation and induction. In addition, we have what we
He's got a background in tax law.
Fine, it's good. So that we can also have CPD for all directors. Because currently, when we're talking about Basel II, Basel III, I'm not sure the board members have even experienced what Basel III is. They possibly do not understand. But Bank of Ghana has said,
they probably had a paid holiday to Basel.
Exactly. But you see, in other jurisdictions, you should understand. After the financial crisis, people were charged for not understanding what should have been done. Again, when we talk about the corporate governance, now they want to implement it. But in it, there are a lot of board evaluation. I saw something in board evaluation. I was very surprised. Board appraiser. It is only in Ghana jurisdiction. We are saying that those who do self-evaluation. I mean, if you look at what has happened and you tell the directors to evaluate themselves, what marks are they going to give to you? So in other jurisdictions like Nigeria and South Africa, you appoint an independent consultant who will do the evaluation of board practices, what has gone on. And they make report to the central bank, and copy is given to the shareholders at the annual general meeting to say that these directors are not performing. But if you put as 3 of us there and we are not performing, say evaluate yourself, what are we going? Oh, we are doing well. And do you want to take that? So I'm saying that the corporate governance is coming in, but Bank of Ghana should also take a lead to help us to improve on it. Because Nigeria, you see, in 2004, Nigeria had a similar crisis, but they insisted and even added whistleblowing. Nigeria, they have whistleblowing.
But we pass it in Ghana. It's never been used. Once again, we have a whistleblower act, and it's not used.
You see, here, how are you protected? In Nigeria, they have even taken part of it, and then use it in the finance and banking. So that something is going on. Sammy, I have been in a bank before, and I know what happened. Who dare you to talk about it? But if there was a dedicated line or dedicated office in Bank of Ghana, if they would be very honest with themselves, and not even disclose to the person you are complaining. Nigeria now, you can go in and tell somebody, or working in the institution, I believe this one is going on. All these financial conglomerates created with the octopus businesses, if I knew some people there like me, I would have reported, provided on condition that I am protected. Bank of Ghana had it. They never talk about this. And I believe that from way forward, looking at corporate, we should also develop a system where people can come and tell us information to lead us to go and look at it.
Okay. Recently, I wrote about the whistleblowers law and what we have made of it so far. It does appear after we got it onto paper, we have forgotten completely about it. And the fight against corruption, or the corruption war, I say, will not be won. If we don't have it implemented, the SHRAJ and the Attorney General Department, who have responsibility for the whistleblowers law, should be mounting campaigns and educating people about the whistleblowers law. We should set up the fund that the law says should be set up, so that when you blow the whistle and then proceeds are gotten out of your whistle blowing successfully, you will get up to about 10%. Up to about 10%. Can you imagine how many people will be reporting their tax defaulting, tax evading, managers or companies? They will do it and they will get the money. So why don't we do it?
Can I add my favorite, disallowance and surcharge.
Yeah, disallowance and surcharge.
There's law in this country that if you blow the whistle on the disallowance and surcharge situation, and the Auditor General does the disallowance and surcharge, and the state recovers money, you are entitled to be compensated.
Right.
It is in the law of Ghana.
Right.
Never used.
Right. So the Bank of Ghana doesn't need a special law for these purposes. And the protection that you should get when you blow the whistle, it looks like it's non-existent. So please, we need to work on this. Now, you speak about appointing some professional, some consultant to do some work. here we have accusations like, if you look at the disclaimer on the Boulders report, the disclaimer on the KPMG report, the persons who are affected seem to suggest that it reduces those disclaimers, seem to reduce those documents to a series of weaponized rumors, and it is unfair for those persons who are implicated. So why do we need this? Can't the Bank of Ghana have the people that are required, like it suggests, to do the work themselves?
I think it's about regulatory capacity. I mean, we've all been talking about the licensing. They have licensed over 30-something banks, and they haven't even developed the regulatory capacity and skills. So that's the reason why they hive off some of the businesses to other people. If they have been conscious of regulatory capacity building over the years, because it's very expensive. It's very expensive to train people. But if you choose not to do that and you hive it to a third party, then he has to want to run away from it. But I believe even if you give him a job to do, that thing of disclaimer, it means it reduces the work he has done. For me, I find it also a bit contradictory.
Okay, we take a break and come back. Okay. We take a break and come back. But a senior lawyer also points me to something. He says if you look at Act 930, what is ordinarily whistleblowing is actually made a duty of a director.
Duty of a director. You're right.
You know, and so directors have the fiduciary, utmost good faith, you know, responsibilities, particularly when you look at Section 57. Section 57. Yeah. Okay, so we take a quick break. We return. I share your comments, and then we wrap up on this matter as we look also on the matter of men's gold. We'll be right back.